Welcome to Today with Dr. Kaye. I'm Dr. Kaye, and I'm delighted to be here with you on our inaugural show. We are starting here live, and we are excited that you have joined us. Now, Angela Davis once said that you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it every day. Well, here on Today with Dr. Kaye, that is what we want to do. It's going to be a daily talk show where we discuss everything from politics to prose, parenting to peace studies, education to evangelicals, Taiwan to Trump. If it is important, if it's interesting, if it's happening in your community or around the country, and if it has your ear, then it has my attention. Now, today in our second hour, we're going to feature a new segment called Trailblazers and Trendsetters, power players who lead the way. Today we have Jill P. Carter, former delegate and director of the Baltimore City Office of Civil Rights. But first, I want to offer condolences to the families of the victims and those who donated blood as a response to what happened last night in Las Vegas. Last night, more than 200 people were injured, including 2 off-duty LA County sheriffs and 58 people so far to count. They were shot dead during a country music festival. While the singer was on the stage, the gun shooting started to take place. Concert goers crouched down in panic and fear as an automatic gun went off. The shooter is identified as 64-year-old Stephen Paddock, who was killed on the scene. Police say Paddock took fire on the 32nd floor of the Bay Resort and Casino, and that the gunfire lasted about 10 to 15 minutes. Now, I want to note that this story is unfolding, and so we're reporting in real time what we know to be true thus far. In more horrific news, the killing of Allie Lee Steinfeld, born Joseph Matthew Steinfeld Jr., brought many to tears and mourning last week as we learned that her remains were found in a bag in a rural southern Missouri chicken coop after being stabbed to death and burned. Steinfeld is the 21st transgender person killed this year in the United States. Texas County authorities have charged 3 people with first-degree murder. Meanwhile, as Puerto Ricans stood in line for water, food, and gas, and with 95% of the island still without power, our president, Donald Trump, continued to attack San Juan Mayor Carmen Yulin Cruz. In a Sunday morning tweet, he alluded to her in all but name, referring to politically motivated ingrates. Cruz, who stood in her power, fired back and stated, quote, "I don't care. He can attack me all he wants. Bring it on. I'm here if it saves lives, if it gets the message in the right place. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn." Well, continuing in the vein of folks who don't care what you say about them, after 9 years in jail for a Las Vegas kidnapping and armed robbery, O.J. Simpson was released on Sunday after submitting a parole release plan for residency in Las Vegas, Nevada. The juice is out and he is back. Here on Today with Dr. Kaye, we give the headlines, local and national news. Joining me to talk about it is Dr. Amrita Myers. She's the Ruth N. Halls Associate Professor of History and Gender Studies at Indiana University, and we'll be joined shortly by Councilman John Bullock of the 9th District. Actually, Councilman John Bullock of the 9th District just walked in. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Dr. Myers, and welcome.
Pleasure to be here.
Now, before we begin our discussion on Las Vegas, we have a bit of sound on the shooting that was posted on social media. I want to tell folks to please be advised that this sound clip is disturbing.
So we were at the venue, and shots started ringing out, and we were thinking they were fireworks, and then I recognized the automatic, the repetition of automatic fire. People started running from the main stage out of the venue. My colleagues and I joined the crowd that were leaving the venue. We got to the MGM Grand, and I started directing people into that particular hotel, and then I went out to the street and helped direct traffic and helped gunshot victims and members of the festival to safety away from the venue. And from what I understand in the press conference that I just observed on TV, there was one shooter. He was in the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay, firing down upon the crowd across the street at the venue. And the police entered the room and killed him. And they're looking for his roommate, which is a 4'11" in height Asian woman named Mary, I believe.
That was audio from what happened last night in Las Vegas. That was posted on social media. It definitely was quite disturbing to hear this. Dr. Bullock, let's start with you. This has been dubbed the worst mass shooting in modern U.S. history. And I went and I kind of looked up what has happened thus far. In June 2016, 49 people were killed inside Pulse, which is a gay nightclub in Orlando. April 2007, on the campus of Virginia Tech, 32 people were killed. December 2012, 27 people were killed at Sandy Hook Elementary School. For some of us, some of the listeners, we remember these incidences very, very vividly. In October 1991, 23 people were killed in Killen, Texas. And this is when George Hennard, he crashed his pickup truck through the wall of a Luby's cafeteria, and then he pulled out his gun and started shooting people. 21 people were killed in July 1984. This was in California at the local McDonald's. And then finally, in 1966, 18 people were killed in Austin, Texas. He actually came onto the campus of the University of Texas and he shot down from a tower. So we're now at a point in the midst of having the biggest hurricane ever, the most dangerous time ever. We're now having the most dangerous mass shooting in U.S. history. Can you talk to us a bit about, are we safe in this country, and exactly how should we define being safe here?
Well, clearly, when we talk about mass shootings, this is unfortunately not an uncommon phenomenon. Virtually, you see this almost every year, it seems like these days, and sometimes in multiple months. The one thing that I find very interesting about this period in time is also who is doing the shooting and how are we characterizing them. So I've heard a lot of conversation today around, are we calling this terrorism? Are we calling it domestic terrorism? Or are we saying it's a lone wolf shooter? And generally, when we're looking at issues of the person being either of color or not of color, being white or being black or being Muslim or what have you, those details tend to come out. And so the way that he's described as being this is sort of atypical or this is not really in the norm, I think that is also worth mentioning. Then you also think about the time period we're in from a political point of view. So we are seeing an uptick not only in racialized and religious-based crime, but then also seeing that the tenor of the country and even the president's response and even what's going to be the response of Congress. Will it be to actually have any changes as it relates to gun safety and access to guns, or is it more just our prayers are with you without any other kind of action? So at this point, I mean, a lot of us are really struggling with this because we're talking about friends, family, anybody else who could be in Vegas or any other place who could be victimized by such an attack with some of these high-powered weapons.
Dr. Myers, I'd like to have you join us here. Now, when they described him earlier, they did not give us his race. They just called him a man. And for many of us, for people of color, this marked an important moment because it seems as if he were a black man, if he were someone whose religious affiliation was Muslim, they tend to release that early on. How does race play into the ways in which this is being characterized and talked about in the media?
Well, Dr. Kaye, I think that if we look at what's happened over the years, not just in the shootings that you mentioned, but I was also thinking about Columbine, and I was thinking about the Connecticut school shootings that happened just a few years ago. And, of course, you mentioned Virginia Tech and others. It seems that if someone is African-American, if someone is foreign-born, if someone is Muslim, if they're, even if they've lived here since they were 18 months old, if they were born in another country, that's one of the first things we hear about is, like you said, their race, their ethnicity, their nationality. And it's a way of automatically othering them and making them somehow outside the norm, outside the identity of an American, identity of belonging to this group in which we live. And yet, if these are white male shooters, we never hear about their race. We don't get photographs of them until much later. There's no attempt to automatically talk about their childhood, their single-parent upbringing, et cetera. They're lone wolves. In other words, they're unique. They're not like the rest of us. They're American, but they're different. And I think that this is really troubling because increasingly we've noticed over the last 2 decades that these kinds of shooting incidences are almost always carried out by white men. The rise of what's been called, right, toxic masculinity is something that we cannot, continue to avoid. These kinds of serial shootings are happening from really, really disturbed white men. We can talk about mental health care. We can talk about a lot of things, but I think we need to face the fact that, all of these things are issues of terrorism. Imagine the terror in the hearts of the people who were there in Las Vegas last night, heard those shots, saw people being killed around them, had to be, evacuated or fled for their lives. This man instilled terror in their hearts. It is domestic terrorism. But when it's someone who's white, it's not terrorism in terms of the way the media constructs it. Terrorism is reserved for those of us who don't look, who aren't white. Well, and so I think that all of these things are really important to consider as we move forward and talk about these things.
Well, if you've just joined us, you're listening to Today with Dr. Kaye, and I actually want to open up the phones early because I know that everyone is dealing with this. Everyone is thinking and talking about this, and we want to make sure here on WEAA that we're making the space available for people to talk through this and talk to our guest about what this means. So give us a call at 410-319-8888. Dr. Bullock, now, I don't want to minimize what happened because I know that when something like this happens, the rush to talk about race does happen. I tend to do that as well. And we don't want to minimize the fact that 50 people, and I think 58 people, and the numbers are still climbing, were killed as a result of what happened. 200 folks plus were injured. So we are not minimizing that. But I think as we drill down a little bit deeper, what do you think this says about where we are? And I think we always say this when there's been a mass shooting. Where are we? What can happen next? But have we reached kind of a breaking point here, Dr. Bullock?
I think we have reached somewhat of a breaking point, but also I think there's a certain numbness that's here, right? I mean, unfortunately, we have this massacre, this attack, and I'm not surprised. I can't say that I'm surprised. I have peers who can't say that they're surprised. Here we go again. And so now we're at the point in society where, mass shootings are commonplace. And our response also seems to be commonplace. I'm not certain that we're at any breaking point to the point that it's going to spur us to any sort of action. I mean, you mentioned, Columbine and then, Sandy Hook more recently. And you would have thought that after having those young people being slaughtered in a school, that there would be some sort of, targeted response. But no. And again, I'll be interested to hear about, whether we're talking about the NRA, if we're talking about both Republicans and Democrats, is there any path forward? Or do we just see ourselves as a gun culture? And again, Second Amendment applies to everybody, and everybody should have a right to carry a gun, even though it's very much misplaced, because we're not looking at a well-regulated militia. We're not looking at any of the tenets that folks would expect in terms of responsible gun ownership, mental health, background checks, even the type of weapons that we allow people to have in society. So until we get to that point, then we're just going to see the same thing over and over again.
Well, we want to open up the phones. We have Terrence from Hartsville. Terrence, welcome to Today with Dr. Kaye.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
I just wanted to make a point that it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the media, because in this particular shooting, you have, a white male shooting at a mostly white event with most of the victims themselves being white. And these situation.
We seem to have lost Terrence. Okay, we'll get him back. Let me know when we get him back. Dr. Myers, I want to have you pick up from where Terrence left off or where he was starting. From what I gather, he was starting with the fact you have a white male who shot into a crowd of mostly white individuals. To talk about that a little bit more, why is it, Dr. Myers, 'cause I know you study this in the media, why is it that the media tends to only focus on the race when the person's black, as if this tends to happen predominantly by black men, and it does not, based upon what you said earlier?
It absolutely does not. All people of all different ethnicities and backgrounds can be involved in crimes. It's not like there's one race that's more, attracted to crime or is more criminal in their behavior than another. But in terms of particular types of crimes, unfortunately, it is white men increasingly who have been involved in these kinds of shootings. When Terrence said that he was wondering how this was going to change the media reporting because it was a white person who shot mainly white people, I think that Dr. Bullock made a really important point when he said you would have thought that after what happened at Sandy Hook, innocent children in a school and teachers, being shot. I mean, that's another incident, right, where you have, small children, very innocent, very vulnerable, primarily white, being killed. And yet there are actually people today, Dr. Kaye, who are on the media circulating that they think that Sandy Hook never really happened, and it was some sort of a media conspiracy to try and bring down the gun lobby, which I think is absolutely breathtaking in its craziness. But I think that we live in it's very easy. I'm also sort of becoming weary about these situations like Dr. Bullock. I wonder, I'm becoming a bit cynical perhaps, is this really going to change anything? Is it always simply a case of our prayers are with the deceased, we grieve with the families, and then, moving on, we have the attention of a fruit fly, 5-minute span in the media, something else will happen, and we'll just continue on with our lives until once again something horrifying happens? Are we willing to admit that this is a country that actually has a very different gun culture from, say, Canada, which we share a large border with, which also had, immigration, a Western frontier, but a very different mindset about guns and gun culture. I really do think that we have to face the fact that our gun culture and the violence of it very much revolved around our history of slavery and slaveholding. People in this country took up arms to protect themselves, not only to keep their property, but to protect themselves from their property. And that engendered a particular kind of gun-holding mentality that has bled down into our society literally 400 years later. If we're not willing to deal with this, we are going to continue to see these mass shootings. If we're going to continue to see people behave in this way, and we're going to have to continue to go to funerals and watch people being put in the ground. And it's really heartbreaking. I think that this was not a man who, it's not about a well-regulated militia. It's not about somebody who's participating in the military. And these are banned weapons. He was using a fully automatic weapon, reloadable. These are not the kinds of weapons that have anything to do with, protecting one's nation from foreign invasion, which is where the Second Amendment comes from, right?
Well, we're going to take a short break here. I want you to stay with us after the break. This is Today with Dr. Kaye. Terrence and Jean and others on the line, we will get to you as we continue to unwrap and unpack what happened in Las Vegas and what that means about the state of the country. This is Dr. Kaye. Stay with us. Welcome back to Today with Dr. Kaye. I'm Dr. Kaye, and I'm so happy that you stayed with us. We're here unpacking what happened last night in Las Vegas. We're talking about the impact on race relations. We're talking about what this means for the state of the country. We're talking about white toxic masculinity, and we are trying to unpack it. I want to open up the phones and start with Terrence from Hartsville. We cut you off earlier, Terrence. We wanted to get to your point now. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Sorry for getting, I don't know what happened there, but the point that I was getting to is that it tends in these situations that the media paints a narrative of either the victim or the aggressor, so to speak. And the point that I was getting to with the white male shooting at mostly white people in the audience is that when we see black men.
Okay, so we have lost Terrence again. I'm going to go right into Jean from Parksville. Jean, how are you? Welcome to Today with Dr. Kaye.
Yeah, hello, everybody.
Hello.
Yeah, it's actually Pikesville.
Pikesville. Thank you, sir.
I have nothing against Parksville. Okay, it's a good, nice community. What I'm hearing, I think I'm hearing, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, that we have these two monolithic groups, black and white. And so when I look at this, I see they are white people, that the white guy was white who perpetrated the crime, and then they were white people in the audience. But they were, weren't they country and western when their genre or their,
yes.
The music type that they liked and so forth and so on. It wasn't like they were, they liked rock music. So, and we associate those kinds of music with particular political persuasions. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking at this like, okay, so country western people got shot by who? So I'm saying, who shot them? So I understand this guy's a millionaire. He owned 2 planes, and he flew back and forth from Florida to Vegas and any way he wanted to go. And it's not adding up to me. Until we find out who he is and why he did what he did. Okay, I'm gonna make this real quick.
Yes, sir.
So
what's your question? Please, I'm glad you joined the conversation.
My question is. And I don't want to say this because, first of all, I want to say I'm very sad for the people who lost families. But this takes me back to when did this mindset or when did this thing start? Didn't it start with Charles Manson and Helter Skelter? And, and so we're talking about white supremacists, et cetera. Isn't their goal to start a race war? Isn't this, it might be far-fetched or it might be, part of the situation. Am I off base?
Okay. Well, let's talk about that. Thank you so much, Gene. I'll come to you, Dr. Bullock. So Gene was laying out in terms of the history of what we're dealing with here, perhaps the connections to what the music was, to who was there. I mean, this was not a rap concert. And if they had said it happened at a rap concert, I wouldn't have to ask kind of the racial makeup of the audience. And when I heard it was a country music concert in a number of ways, I had a feeling of who was there. But I don't know if it's about the music so much as about this other piece that Gene got to around, is it starting a race war? Is it politically motivated?
I think it's worth investigating. I mean, you could extrapolate and say, okay, country music, what might be the political leanings of that crowd might be more conservative, although there are people of a variety of stripes who actually like country music. So, I mean, it may be something there, but we're not certain of it. He mentioned the person's wealth. We do know he was retired. He was an accountant. He liked to play poker. So those are some of the details we know about. But to the greater point that you're mentioning, we are in a place in America where there does seem to be this polarization. We're talking about racially, but also economically and politically. And so now we're at a point where people do seem to be on edge. You look at Charlottesville, as a matter of fact. Not only do you have you have issues of mass shootings, but then also think about someone driving their car into a crowd.
Right.
You think about even the response from the president on down, and it's like, well, there are people on both sides, and trying to look at it through a lens of trying to equate some of these issues. But clearly there is something wrong in terms of our politics, in terms of our social interactions, and even in a situation like this where people are really on edge. And then what is going to be the response? Is it actually going to be a response that is a humanitarian? Because just like, and this is unfortunate, we have the situation going on that just happened in Las Vegas, but also think about what's going on in Puerto Rico. And how do we deal with people's humanity, right? I mean, are they people to us, or are they just people, or are they just numbers? And I think that's important for us to start thinking about.
Dr. Myers, I definitely want to just transition a little bit to talking about Puerto Rico. There's been a lot of debate about Puerto Rico and not realizing that for some people that they are Americans. I think that's something we have to put out there and looking at what is happening. I've been following it all weekend, particularly reading the story about the hospital where there were people who could not be evacuated because they were on life support systems and all kinds of electronic systems, and all of them died because they lost power in the hospital. Can you talk a bit about this and where we are at this moment where you have the president directly attacking the mayor who's only asking for the assistance that any state would ask for in a time of crises?
I find it so appalling that we have a leader in the White House who refers to NFL players as SOBs. I'm not going to say the words, of course, because they choose to take a knee, and yet people who commit blatant acts of violence and terrorism get no such labels. Let's turn to Puerto Rico. I want to also just say that we need to not forget the Virgin Islands in this because they were also hit by Maria. One of the islands had been hit previous with Irma and lost its hospital. The second, when Maria hit, it took out the other hospital on the other island. They are completely helpless, and they're under almost 24-hour-a-day curfew right now. So we have the Virgin Islands and we have Puerto Rico, all of which are American protectorates and colonies. This is an empire, whether we want to call ourselves one or not. And we are an imperial power. These are our colonies. These are folks who have exactly the same rights as people who were devastated by hurricanes, by Harvey and Irma in places like Texas and Florida. And yet there has been very little, no or slow response to helping these individuals. People are without water, without food, without medicine. People are literally, there are goods actually on ships and in planes unable to get to folks, and people, as you said, are dying from lack of electricity, lack of medical care, lack of basic necessities of life. I also have to say that although these are American citizens, I'm also appalled that we would need to even say that because isn't it simply a matter of the fact that they are human beings and they require our compassion? Would we behave like this if this was a crisis that happened in London or in Paris? If this happened in Toronto, would we be talking about, there's Puerto Rico sits in an ocean, a mighty big ocean. It's irrelevant. They're human beings. They're Americans, but they're human beings. And I think that we absolutely are starting to see that the empire has some real cracks because at the end of the day, Puerto Ricans serve out of in a much larger percentage, for example, in the United States military than they are demographically a percentage of our population, right? These are folks who give to the country in so many ways in terms of consuming goods, in terms of participating in the military, right, honoring the flag that people talk about so much, and yet we are unwilling to turn around and give them the same help and aid when it is required. The callousness in that is one thing, but I also think we have to start to really be honest about where language difference and race and ethnicity comes into place, because I've heard so many people who actually argue with me about the fact that the PR they're not Americans. They Google it and they find out it's true and they still think that somebody's lying to them.
Well,
because they don't want to they don't want to have to acknowledge that
right.
These are Americans because they're not white and they speak Spanish.
No, I think it was interesting, and I want to pull out one thing you said because everything is just quite powerful. The empire does have cracks in it, but thinking about what happened in what was it, London or Paris? It was Paris, where everyone changed their Facebook page. What was it, J. Sweet Perry? I am Paris too. People have not done
flags.
Oh, they put out flags.
Nation. Yes.
People who've never even been to Paris, don't speak French, but felt connected with this sense that they're human beings. But was it really, Dr. Bullock, they're human beings, but they look like us, right? I mean, if you think about Paris, you think white, they look like us. In Puerto Rico, they don't look like us. They look like the people that our president has told us. If you're afraid, if you think you're losing everything, then you need to blame the blacks, the Muslims, the Mexicans. In that order.
Hombres.
That's it, the bad hombres.
Right, the bad hombres. Look, a lot of it is really around identity and race and ethnicity and who do we see as sympathetic victims and who we just sort of cast aside. And so, yes, that phenotype does matter. I think there's something else here that's also worth mentioning, too, is also gender. So think about how the president addresses women, how he addresses women of color, even a woman of color who is in a leadership position, who literally sleeping on a cot, with her family, and, in the midst of the storm, wading through waters, trying to get people safety and just pleading for assistance. But again, that humanitarian crisis doesn't always look the same. Think about even our response to crises in Africa. Our response in Africa is very different than in Europe. It's very different in the Caribbean versus some other place where people are of a brighter hue.
That people are wondering where we stand. I want to turn our attention, before we run out of time, to talking a little bit about Allie Lee Steinfeld. And this is the 21st transgender person to be killed this year in the United States. We're not talking a lot about this, Dr. Myers. I know there's been a push within the Black feminist community to get people to think about how transgendered people are in danger, that they have reached a crisis point. Can you talk a little bit about this, please?
I wish we didn't have to talk about it because I wish it wasn't an issue, but you're absolutely right. Black people are more likely to be the victims of homicide. Black women are more likely to be the victims of homicide. And very sadly, Black transgender women are the most likely. Their life expectancy has now dropped below 30 years of age.
Wow.
If you are a Black transgendered woman in the United States, you are more likely to be the victim of a violent homicide, before the age of 30 than any other cause of death. It is absolutely horrifying. We actually held a large teach-in on the Indiana University campus where I work that I helped to organize last spring, and it was the entire 2 days was dedicated to looking at violence against women of color. And we looked at Islamic women, we looked at transgendered women, we looked at domestic violence, and we looked at African-American women. And we had a woman from our domestic violence shelter come and speak specifically about issues with domestic violence and transgendered women. Dr. Kaye Gross came and spoke about the Say Her Name movement. And the fact that we have to have a Say Her Name movement, because even within larger civil rights and race-oriented movements like Black Lives Matter, it's still very difficult to often get the names of women remembered and read. That we're more likely to talk about about Trayvon than we are about Aisha. The fact is that if all Black lives matter, then Black women's lives matter, and Black transgendered women's lives matter. And so I think that this is something that we really need to, again, who's American, who's worthy of our sympathy and empathy, who's worthy of our help and our compassion, who's worthy of citizenship. Black transgendered people are more likely to be picked up and thrown in jail, where they are also more likely to be subjected to violence by other inmates. At every step of life, harder access to health care, access to basic necessities that would keep them functioning, and they live in fear. And this is not how people should be living in the United States.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Dr. Myers, for joining us here out of Indiana University. I want to thank Councilman John Bullock from the 9th District. This is Dr. Kaye on Today with Dr. Kaye here on WEAA 88.9 FM. After the break, we turn our attention to the city paper. We'll talk about the history. We'll talk about the future. We'll talk about its impact. You can join us at 410-319-8888, or you can tweet me at Today with Dr. Kaye. Welcome back. This is Dr. Kaye here on Today with Dr. Kaye. This is our inaugural show. So we're talking about both national news and things that matter to Baltimore City. We talk now and turn our attention to the Baltimore City paper. It's a free alternative weekly newspaper. It was founded here in 1977 by Russ Smith and Alan Hirsch. And the most recent owner was the Baltimore Sun Media Group. It is known for being cutting edge, hard hitting with a local new focus. The city paper has been a staple in this city for over 40 years. But it's set to fold this year, due in part, from what we've heard, to the collapse of advertising revenue income to print media. We're going to talk about that. We're going to unpack all of that, as well as the incredible history of the city paper. Joining me first is Karen Hoopert. She's a former editor of Baltimore City Paper and currently the Associate Director of the Masters in Writing program at Johns Hopkins University. Thank you for joining us, Karen.
Thanks for having me.
And we also have Brandon Soderberg. He's still the editor-in-chief of the city paper, and he's co-founder of the Baltimore Institute for Nonprofit Journalism. Thank you so much, Brandon.
Well, thank you. And congrats on your first show here.
Thank you. I'm so glad you joined me. If we're going to have a show here in Baltimore City, we got to start by talking about the city paper. Karen, I'm going to start with you. Can you talk to us about how the city paper, how you built your credibility among the readers, and who did you want to initially target?
Well, I think one of the things that City Paper has really done in the city is kept the media landscape a little broader, covered things that the Baltimore Sun was not covering, or covered things in greater depth than the Sun was doing. And I think our audience has always been and still is the 55,000 print readers and the hundreds of thousands of online readers. We try to make the paper diverse and to cover Baltimore City in depth, including a really strong arts section and arts coverage that really the Sun barely covers a lot of the artists that Baltimore City Paper has consistently covered over the 40 years.
Now, Brandon, I will say that in full transparency, your paper is the only paper that makes me cry. And I'll tell you what issue that is. But you did an issue where you named and gave the story of every person that was lost to homicide. And just reading the sentence or two about each person, I came across someone by the name of Whitehead. Oh. And it just stopped me thinking how quickly it could be me. I have two sons and I'm raising them here in Baltimore City. So why does the city paper take that unique angle? Like, do you want to get people inside the story?
Sure. I mean, I would note that that issue was spearheaded by Karen. That was the beginning of 2016 because of 344 homicides in 2015. So it's the first issue of the year. And that was really Karen's idea. So all credit to her on that one.
Thank you, Karen. So then thank you for making me cry. You're the person.
I didn't make you cry. I'm sorry. But in general, yeah, I mean, what we try to do, what I want to do with the paper, wanted, I guess, because we're dead soon. November 1st is our last
November
issue.
1st is the last date.
Yeah,
okay.
Tell stories and focus on people and tell the news through the people rather than maybe I feel like the opposite way that a lot of, again, dinging the Sun here as usual, but the way that the Sun might do it, which is generally people are used to tell. The news is told in the opposite way, in which you're sort of people are the vessel for understanding the news, whereas we want to try to filter the news through people so that you have a sense of how it's affecting communities all over the city, how it's affecting individuals, and that's kind of what we've really tried to do. One issue that we did recently that was kind of a staff undertaking was the Baltimore ceasefire issue, which, I guess 5 or 6 of us were out all weekend, especially me and Joe Giordano, the photographer. Mm-hmm. And that was an issue where we tried to file dispatches and really capture from east to west and in between the whole city during that weekend. And that was something that I don't think. And also we tried to be present at the homicides that were happening, the 2 that happened that weekend. But that's an idea too of just like trying to make sure that you're seeing the people and oftentimes also the systemic and emotional reasons behind these stories, not just, hey, this is something that happened. Our vision I think has always been like, you want people to feel the stories, which I appreciate that something moves you to cry, because you can know what happens from the Sun or in other papers, but you might know how the city feels from our paper. I think that's kind of our goal.
That the city paper really talking about how people feel. What's interesting is I grabbed kind of the latest copy, which I encourage people to go and pick up, because where can you ever see a story talking about the Baltimore City trans sex workers and having the story in your face and looking at them as people, rather than putting them in a group and kind of talking about their lives and about their choices? The city paper went and talked to them and gave them the space to kind of express themselves. Karen, there's going to be a gap come November 2nd when the city paper closes and puts out its final issue. What do you think is going to fill the gap? Because we're losing a lot of things here in Baltimore City this year. This is a year of big closings, big endings, big retirements in terms of having these media activist voices on the ground. What takes this place of the city paper?
Well, I think it's going to be a challenge. I think the media landscape is going to suffer as a result of city paper's closure for sure. And I mean, part of that is I think there's this idea in the culture, among reporters that it's all about, scooping, getting this story out faster than the competition, et cetera. But I think what gets lost in that sort of fairly flat rendition of journalists is the idea that competition also fuels coverage of different kinds of stories. So reporters like to be where other reporters are not. And what that means when you lose one of the only, major alternative to the Baltimore Sun here is who's going to be at those school board meetings, who's going to be at the sanitation meetings, who's going to be covering protests and Black Lives Matter or ceasefire, which City Paper has done an amazing job. You lose those journalists out there in the streets covering the city. And one of the things that I think is really important to remember about alternative newspapers, too, is that they have a trickle-up effect. So even though their readership may be smaller than mainstream publications in any city, what they do is they also hold the mainstream media's feet to the fire and make them pay attention to these issues by writing about them and drawing the public's attention and forcing city officials to respond to these issues. And a lot of times the mainstream media picks up on those stories that the smaller newspapers, the alternative press is covering, and then begins to cover them themselves, which again holds city officials' feet to the fire and hopefully creates change.
Now, Brandon, I work in communication at Loyola University, and our students are always asking us, is print news dead? Have we reached an area where people don't want to read newspapers anymore? The city paper's leaving. The Baltimore Sun has gotten thinner and smaller in a lot of ways. The New York Times, which used to kind of break my door open on Sunday mornings, has gotten a lot lighter. So what do you think is the future of newsprint? I mean, should people still continue to major in journalism?
Yes, they should. I think that,
I want to keep a job, but I want
right,
to talk about it.
There's many reasons why. I mean, well, briefly, I would say with that, the cover story this week about the trans sex workers, that story is written and photographed by interns for us. It was their project they did for the summer. And I sort of dropped it on their laps. I was like, hey, I got some tips on this. And I just kind of threw them into the fire, and they figured it out. So that's an opportunity that might be gone because of the paper, but hopefully continue otherwise, but elsewhere. But I don't think print is dead. I think print needs to figure out how to be different. Like, yeah, you can't compete with Twitter, and we just should stop trying to as print publications. Certainly what we try to do with the paper, which might be a model for other print publications, or maybe not because we're dying soon, so you shouldn't be listening to what I have to say about this. But like you have the ability to sort of capture a moment And again, this feeling, and whereas, so for example, I went to sleep last night at 3:30 in the morning watching horrible videos of this shooting last night.
Right.
I didn't, and that's something the news can't really compete with. But hopefully what you can do is read different insight into it. I mean, another example was the Orlando Weekly, the alternative weekly down there. They profiled after the last June's shooting at the Pulse nightclub.
Right.
They profiled over that full year every homicide, any victim of that shooting. Like, that's something that print could do. Whether you need to be on print or not, it does. It's kind of a long view. So what I would say to anyone listening is, like, who's thinking about investing or anything, would be that, like, do you ever click on a web ad in your life when you're reading a website? Do you ever click on the ads?
Oh, no.
So, okay, so if print is dead and no one's clicking on these web ads, we need to figure something. So in a purely pragmatic, hard numbers way, print still generates income in a way we haven't solved the web. And so in a way, what needs to happen now is that people that are doing print need to I would take a different approach to how they're covering things. And I do think that the alternative press, for a lot of reasons, is the model for that. We show you how to cover something a week late by going more in depth, or covering a protest that I might follow a blog on, and then the article might be like, well, this one guy got chokeslammed by a police officer at the protest, so I called him up and said what he was doing. He's still in the hospital. No one else covered that. You know what I mean? Those kinds of things. Like, so print needs to serve a different purpose than it used to, because you don't need to wake up and open the Times and know what happened, because you have Twitter and you have all these other things, which I'm not opposed to those things at all. So print needs to reconfigure itself. But then on the monetary side, it still generates income, and the internet does not generate income, really.
No, it does not. And thinking about the city paper, because that's part of the city paper closing, this thing around revenue. For Karen, for some of us on the outside, kind of looking in, was it a surprise? I mean, could you see this coming? Or was it as much as a surprise to you on the inside as it was to us on the outside? Because it was shocking to hear that we were moving in this direction.
Yeah. I mean, I think that when I first came to City Paper, there was a lot of talk, shortly after the Sun acquired the paper, that felt like conspiracy theorists to me. Like, they're just acquiring this paper to close it. And I did not buy that idea. But when I was working there as the editor, I did feel as though the resources we needed to help the paper grow and thrive were not given to us. And so it did feel like we were being undercut in terms of the support that we needed to really continue to grow, as I said, and thrive. So, I mean, I think that there are challenges financially, but I also felt like there were decisions that were made by the management that undercut the paper. So that's one thing. And to go kind of back to talking about like the kinds of ways in which alternative newspapers could potentially be a model for other publications. Brandon mentioned, the fact that it is a weekly imposes certain restrictions in terms of coverage, but also opens a lot of opportunities. And one example that we faced at City Paper was during the mayoral election, for example, the the paper goes to press on Monday nights at midnight.
Okay.
The election's on a Tuesday. It hits the stands on a Wednesday. So what do you do with your Wednesday cover story under those circumstances? You can't pretend an election didn't happen or whatever. But you can't get ahead of it. So with City Paper, one of the things that we did in November was to have 100 people across Baltimore weigh in with what they think the new city officials and city council members, et cetera, the new mayor, what should they prioritize in the city? And we talked to people in, what you would consider experts, but also ordinary people. We talked to a lot of high school students at Poly and City, some elementary school students, and really tried to involve the community in a conversation about shaping the direction our city could come. And that was kind of an idea that came out of some restrictions about deadlines, but fostered, I think, some creative solutions to that.
Well, if you're just joining us, you're listening to Today with Dr. Kaye, and we are talking about the closing of the City Paper. Now, the story has been floated around for a while. We have the hard date here. City Paper will close on November 1st.
That'll be our last issue.
That'll be the last issue. So in the little time we have left, and we want to invite people to join us if you have a question about the City Paper. I mean, where else can you find Baltimore City Power Rankings? And my favorite column, I think my secret joy, is Savage Love. I don't like to read that out loud, but when I'm by myself, I like to read through because they're so funny and interesting. You can give us a call at 410-319-8888. Let's talk about some of your favorite big stories. I know that the City Paper has broken a lot of stories. I'm thinking about the plagiarism story from the Baltimore Sun. What are some of your top stories, the things that you're going to miss the most in terms of seeing in print here at the City Paper?
I mean, for me, it was such a deciding moment for the city as well, but I feel like I'm incredibly fond of our Baltimore Uprising coverage. Again, another sort of collective effort. Everyone was on board, and we started covering the protests on 1 or 2 days after Freddie Gray died. So we were there from there through the weekend where there was some violence downtown, which is kind of a story that we were the only ones to report in the right way, which is to say that it had a lot to do with racist sports fans, which is a very relevant topic right now.
Yes, it is.
And then into Monday where it became a riot. But we covered that obsessively and in a 3D way, and I feel really proud about that coverage. And it was a massive effort by everyone on staff at the time. From the editor then was Evan. Baynard Woods was one of the main reporters out there. Joe Giordano I don't think he slept for a week and shot photos. I was out there a lot. Ed Erickson covered Freddie Gray's funeral, and there's some freelancers we used as well that did really great work. Like that to me was something, again, like we were able to capture that week. And that was sort of also a week where we had, once the rioting happened on the 27th, that Monday, and as Karen said, we closed the paper on a Monday night. We decided to flush the whole issue and just fill it with all the coverage we had been doing. So so that's an example of like, we knew we had to find a way to do this. So we really, and I feel like people I've seen, it's very touching, is like you'll see people that have that issue hanging up in their house or they have it pinned to the wall. That's really great. So that's for me like a great example of what we've done, especially in the past few years as just a collective effort, which I think is when we've done our best, is when issues sort of bounce ideas off each other and feed into each other like that.
How about you, Karen? So we're just talking about your favorite issue. Mine, of course, as I mentioned earlier, is 344.
Yeah.
That was the one for me.
I might be with you on that one in a way, because I think it was it successfully visualized the scope of the problem. And that was kind of our starting point in trying to think about what this issue would look like. Is, what if we just list all the people who died, 344 people in a straight line, black and white, row after row, and we had an all-black cover with just the faintest 344 there. And, I think the cumulative impact of seeing all of these people and their names and the details regarding their homicides was powerful in a way that I think, I don't know, was interesting. I think it emotionally resonated, even though the language was very unemotional. It all was mostly drawn from our weekly Murder Inc. column. It was the language of neutral police reports in a way. And yet it just, was filled an issue of the newspaper to list these people's names, and I think made people think in that way that Brandon had just mentioned, that it makes you feel something emotionally, makes you want to act to end this. And I think that's an important function of the alternative press, both giving a person the tools they need in the context to understand the systemic problems, but also to move them on an emotional level through the stories of individual people, so that they're motivated to act.
I think that's one of the things I've always appreciated about the City Paper. There's always a need that your issues fill. I mean, we didn't need more histrionic coverage of 344. we just needed to know their names and a little bit about their stories, which we hadn't heard. I mean, there's a story behind every number, which we hadn't read anywhere, at least in a comprehensive way. To go from number 1, the beginning of the year, all the way down to, it was just very powerful. So now as you look forward, as we begin to wrap our time here, because we want to have you back November 1st, I have that as my countdown day. So I'll
cry fest.
I know. I am crying with you with the Baltimore City Power Rankings. I read them. I love the way you talk about we remember everything you've done, Ray Lewis, 1 knee or 2. We remember in the city paper. But as you count down, if you were to kind of think about how you should go out with a bang, like what story do you think should be on the last cover of the city paper, unless, as you said, in July, someone swoops in and saves the paper? If it does indeed go out, what is the big story you think should be on the cover?
I'll let Brandon take that question.
I know
still there, right? So what do you think,
yeah,
Brandon?
So I think that our last issue, as I think I've written before, I am very averse to nostalgia, but I think other people are not. So I think the last issue is, I know right now our plan is to sort of have reflections from the staff, which is, we don't have the time or the effort or the resources to do one last amazing story, but I feel like what we've been trying to do, kind of cheating your question here, Dr. Kaye, but like the ceasefire thing was something where it was like that was a real, we knew we were close. So that one, there was a amazing story by Rebecca Kirkman and Maura Callahan about sexual assault in the arts. It's 15,000 word story. That story about this week's cover.
Kondwani, the story
yeah,
with
exactly.
him.
So we've really been
good.
trying to be like, just because we're essentially dead in the water doesn't mean we're going to give up. So that's kind of what we've been trying to do and really keep these issues alive and feel that way. So I feel like any of those stories maybe could have been a final story. But actually, I think our last issue is kind of going to probably be a big old sentimental mess of an issue.
I mean, because I have some ideas. I was like, because I've drawn my own city paper.
Sure.
I just put my picture there today with Dr. Kaye. So Karen Hooper and Brandon Soderberg, we definitely thank you for joining us. We will count down, as everyone will, to the last issue of the city paper on November 1st. 40 years of publications will end there. Our hope is that there will be a way for someone to step in and fill the gap. We will keep reading until it's not there anymore. If you're still with us, and I know you are, you want to give us a call at 410-319-8888, because coming up after the break is our new segment called Trendsetters and Trailblazers, and we have director Jill P. Carter in the studio with us. I'm Dr. Kaye. Don't turn that dial. Welcome back to Today with Dr. Kaye. It's a daily talk show where we discuss everything from politics to prose, parenting to peace studies, education to evangelicals, and Taiwan to Trump. If it is important, if it's interesting, if it happens in your community or around the country, and if it has your ear, then it has my attention. So up next, we are turning our attention to the movers and shakers who lead and trailblaze the opportunities. They give us what we need to have, they stand in the gap, and they give us the facts. They are called our trendsetters. And once a month on Mondays, we will highlight another one. But as we start on our inaugural show, we had to pick someone who we know has been a lighthouse in this community. She has blazed a path. She has opened up the way, and it's none other than Jill Carter. She's a former city delegate of the 41st District, and she's currently the Director of Civil Rights and Wage Enforcement as of this January. She has held countless positions and experiences with working with the city of Baltimore, including running for mayor in hopes of continuing her father's legacy. And even though she didn't win, what she did do, which would make her father very proud, is she took on the charge to find a way to still work to transform this city. Her father left us a legacy of being liberal and aggressive for change. Jill P. Carter, thank you for joining us and for being our first Trendsetter honoree.
Wow, thank you so much. It's really an honor to be your first guest as a trendsetter on your first show. And, when I first heard of you on these airways, I think this is the first time I ever heard of you, Dr. Kaye. And I was so thrilled. I was like, finally, a voice that I've been waiting to hear on the air, someone, a breath of fresh air, a Black woman that was strong in intellect and strong in passion and strong in a sense of understanding our need to kind of combine activism with academics. And so I'm thankful, very thankful for you, and I'm so happy that you have the show.
Thank you, and I'm just happy to know you. I have known Director Jill Carter from afar, and I have always wanted to engage with her. And so when they asked me to put together my list of trendsetters, you were at the top. I said, if I could start with Jill P. Carter, then I start by letting the folks of Baltimore City know that we still have your back. Here at WEAA, we hear you and we respond to you, and we want to do the type of programming that matters to you. And a way of kind of getting that credibility is having Jill P. Carter. We was also supposed to be joined by Jane Miller. She, of course, is dealing with what's happening in Las Vegas. She's been a reporter for the last 30 years, and we're going to profile her, hopefully when something breaking isn't happening, and she can join us in the studio. So, Director Carter, I will say by way of full transparency that Director Carter did rope me into being a commissioner. So I am a commissioner with the Civil Rights Commission, the Community Relations Commission, excuse me, and I was sworn in last Monday. And so it's my honor to work with you and to be able to do what I can to transform this city for Baltimore residents. So thank you for that. So now, you are Baltimore born and bred.
Yes.
I went and read your bio. You attended Western High School, which is down the street. You went to Loyola College, which is where I work. You went to the University of Baltimore School of Law. Now, what's interesting, Director Carter, is that most people grow up and they want to get out of the city where they grew up in. What made you decide to stay?
Wow. So basically, Baltimore is my city, and I've always talked about the beautiful upbringing I had and beautiful people and beautiful families, but also it represented the civil rights struggle and the struggle for freedom and black power, because that was what I was born into. And so as I grew up and matriculated through such places as Loyola, which was a very difficult time and place for me. At the time I went to Loyola back in the 80s, they didn't have any black professors.
Wow.
Believe it. I had no black professor at Loyola the whole time.
Wow.
So, I came out of school and I was like, looked at the city, and I realized it really hadn't advanced very far. And so I began to really feel as a 21-year-old or so, I grew up without a father, but why? My father died for the cause, for the passion he had for fighting for liberation. And I did not see equality in the city of Baltimore. And so I kind of felt like I'm going to stay here and keep on fighting and keep on pushing until we have equality in the city, until we have justice in the city.
When I think about you, I think a lot about the children of Malcolm X, and Betty Shabazz, their kids. I think about the children of Dr. King and Coretta. I think about the children of Medgar Evers and Myrlie Evers. The idea that, you are the child of a father who gave his life, all of his time, all of his commitment, because he had a vision that something better could take place, that people deserved something better in their life. Luke Broadwater in the Baltimore Sun, he wrote about what happened to your father in 1968, and I just want to read that your father was nominated by then Mayor Thomas D'Alexandro III, right, to lead an anti-poverty agency and bring about liberal and aggressive change. His nomination was rejected. They called your father too militant, too radical. One person said, we need more of our people. And then he corrected himself and said, well, we need more white people to be nominated for city jobs. You know about that story from the inside out. I mean, these are your Thanksgiving Day stories. Can you tell us about what was really happening then?
So it's really interesting because while it may sound to the person that listens to this now as just, okay, so once again, a person that was kind of anti-establishment was rejected by the establishment and didn't get a job. But what I realized, and I've realized more and more over time, it actually was the chance for revolutionary change versus not. The chance to really transform housing for poor people in Baltimore City, for real affordable housing, quality housing, and not. It was also establishment versus non-establishment, because as quiet as it's kept, like any movement, my father was not always fully embraced by everyone that was in the movement. The movement was not monolithic and everyone wasn't always working in unity. And so there was a lot of infighting in that movement. And so I think there were people that were, in favor of real change, and then people that were kind of pushing against it. But what I will say is that at the time that my dad was rejected, well, first of all, the word is that D'Alessandro did make the nomination, but that Schaefer was then the president of the city council, and he did the work behind the scenes to make sure that the council stayed in line and did not confirm my dad, and so that's what happened. It's been up in the air as to whether or not D'Alessandro was a part of that or whether he really wants it. I've talked to him in recent years, and in fact, years ago when I first came across D'Alessandro as an adult and as a lawyer, the first thing he said to me, without any provocation, was, I know what people say, but I really, really wanted your father for that job. But what's very telling is that there were riots at that time. There were people pushing back and very upset that Walter Carter did not get that position. And as a result of all of the upheaval at that time, D'Alessandro chose not to run for re-election. Very similar to what we've just witnessed in Baltimore with the last mayor.
Now, people are responding here on Facebook. They're excited that you're on the show, and they're telling me you call her delegate, you call her former delegate. So, what should people call you? I'm just going to call you Jill because I know you. But is it delegate? Is it former delegate? You just became director in January. Like, what is a title that people should give you?
I don't know. I'm very comfortable with people calling me my name. I will say that delegate, because I had it for 14 years.
Oh, wow.
It feels right. And in fact, I still haven't changed my Instagram page. I'm still Delegate Jill. So for now, whatever you want, just, as long as it's not something derogatory, as frankly I heard on the way in the building.
Oh my! Now I do have this to ask you. I'm from D.C. and my dad pastors a very large church in D.C. So I grew up as Reverend Dr. Carson Wise's daughter. And when we would go down to South Carolina, they would say, "Your father did," and they would tell me that I would have to live up to that. I want to ask you, what is it like having to have and bear the weight of your father's legacy on your shoulders?
So, I've never felt that type of pressure because since he died when I was young, I always felt like I was just always happy anybody would want to talk about my daddy or tell me about my father. I just loved listening. I soak it up like a sponge. But I'll tell you, as a delegate, I never felt pressure. As a lawyer, I didn't feel pressure. But now with the title Director of the Office of Civil Rights, I'm like, I got to really make some strong changes in here. I can't just be a lame person in office, just, kind of going through the motions. We have a real opportunity. And so the first thing that I did, I think, is one of the smartest things and the best things. It shows where I want to go, is that I appointed people that I thought brought diverse backgrounds, but also that would bring the opportunity for this Community Relations Commission to realize its full potential. This commission has the power and the authority to actually take on issues of systemic discrimination in Baltimore City. The role of this commission in my office is to eradicate discrimination in Baltimore City, past and present. That's a big deal. But, I can't do it by myself, so I put smart people like you and all of the other board members on there because I know that everybody brings a different piece to the table. And I think that together we're going to be able to do something.
Now, if you just joined us, this is Today with Dr. Kaye, and this is our first Trendsetters segment. And we're talking with Director, Delegate, Jill P. Carter, Esquire. But she's a Today with Dr. Kaye trendsetter. We're talking about her legacy. If you have a question for her about her legacy, you have a question for her about Baltimore City, give us a call at 410-319-8888. Now, you have had a very storied career. You were an attorney with the Legal Aid Bureau. You were a founding member of the Black Lawyers Group. You were a journalist with the Afro. I'm a journalist with the Afro now. I write an op-ed column. You're the founder and the president of the Walter B. Carter Foundation. You served as a member of the Baltimore City Democratic Central Committee. You were a delegate of the Democratic Party National Convention in 2016. You are one of Baltimore's top 100 women, and you're now one of the Baltimore Sun 25 Women to Watch this year. So with everything that you have done, what do you think is your greatest contribution to the city?
Wow. I don't know. How's that for an answer? But I can tell you that the struggle that I relate to is the struggle of being a delegate, the struggle of feeling very alone in terms of the institution of Annapolis, feeling connected, of course, with people here. But once I was there in those halls of Annapolis, I always felt very David and Goliath, very much like I was alone fighting for, trying to do Herculean task. But here's the interesting thing that I'd like people to always focus on when you think about Annapolis and the state legislative body. Think about the fact that the reason that I felt alone and that it was Herculean task or mountains to be moved was because even though Black people make up the majority population of the city and that we are the most loyal constituency of the Democratic Party, all of the issues that I wanted to champion that really concerned the interest of Black people were categorically rejected and denied all the time.
Wow.
And so as we talk about where we are in this country with Trump and Republicans and all of the heinous things that are occurring on a national level, I don't want people to lose focus of what is going on right here in the state of Maryland in the Maryland General Assembly.
So now, if you think about your legacy, because I do want to keep framing that back. I think it's important for people to understand the contribution that Black women have made to this city and that we continue to make. I think about Mayor Pugh just last Monday at the Civil Rights Breakfast. She was very clear in pointing out all the Black women that she has in positions of power here, transforming this city and kind of holding this city up. But for years, Director Carter, you were banned from a number of places in the media where you weren't allowed to go. Could you talk about that a little bit?
I don't know that anybody's going to come out and say the truth that I was banned, but if you talk to various reporters at various media outlets, they will tell you, I wasn't allowed to print you or you wasn't allowed to have you on the show. And so what happened really, what's kind of interesting now is ever since the uprising, I've noticed all of the media outlets, including the Baltimore Sun, including who you just had on the Baltimore City paper. And again, I cast no aspersions on the people that were here because I do believe that there's a newer group that's come in over, in recent years. But I was absolutely I wasn't just banned in terms of the journalists not being allowed to quote me in the Sun and in the City paper, and even in the Afro. But I was actually, when there was something written, it was distorted or it was derogatory very often. And so let me just put that in context to contextualize it. So at the time that I was elected in 2003, O'Malley was mayor, and then he became governor. And he had a very strong hold on the Democrat Party, and everybody was pretty much operating elected people in support of his potential running presidential candidacy or in fear of repercussions from him if they did anything against him. And so at that time I came in, there was the height of the illegal arrest, and I was the one who started to focus on that and bring it to people's attention, and it was very much not appreciated. And so that's how the whole thing kind of got rolling. And then sort of like in Annapolis, the leadership of the House and Senate then began to kind of label me as a troublemaker. And then what's interesting is that this happens not just there, but in any institution.
Right.
When that person is pushing back, everybody's kind of like walking, they don't want to speak to you in the public. They're like in private, they're saying, keep fighting. I like what you're doing, but they're not going to jeopardize their own status and their own stature. So, that's kind of what was going on. But I will say that kind of started to turn around even before I took this new role. And I just want to say, so I was a reporter at the Afro. I met Sean Yos then, and he actually took my position when I moved on. And so when he was always one that was here and wherever he was at the Afro or when he was even here at WEAA, who always was one to allow me to have voice when others would not. And in fact, hopefully this is a good thing for you, but I was his first guest on his show here when he went daily at EAA. So, that's twice for me with Sean and now with you. So we wish all good things and hope your show can be that successful as his and even live on longer.
I'm very excited that you said that because I was thinking a lot as I was preparing for this show, thinking about the people whose radio shoulders I stand on. I was thinking about Beverly Burke, who was the first person to bring me on WEAA to do news spots with her. I was thinking about the Mark Steiner show and the number of times I guest hosted, and then Sean Yos on First Edition, the number of times I guest hosted for him. I think about Tom Hall, who's on another station, who also helped train me up. And I think about Anthony McCarthy, who also works with you now, but he brought me on this show. So that is one of the things about Baltimore City, that there are people who are willing to let you stand on their shoulders and lift you up to do the work that you want to do. And so that was just a great moment for me to say thank you publicly for them. If you've just joined us, we're talking here with Director Jill P. Carter about her legacy. She's our first trendsetter. Stay with us after the break, because we're going to open it up with Jill P. Carter and talk about the future of Baltimore City. Call and Tom from Baltimore. Stay with us. We'll get to your calls as soon as we get back. This is Dr. Kaye with Today with Dr. Kaye. Welcome back. This is Dr. Kaye here on Today with Dr. Kaye. Call us at 410-319-8888. Tweet us at Today with Dr. Kaye. So we're continuing our conversation with our first Today with Dr. Kaye trendsetter, Director Jill P. Carter. She's Baltimore City's Director of Civil Rights and Wage Enforcement. We now want to move from talking about her legacy, which is amazing, to talking a bit about how she sees Baltimore City. We have Carl on the line from downtown Baltimore. Carl, welcome to Today with Dr. Kaye.
Thank you. I had a question for is it Director Carter or Delegate Carter?
Either one.
I have an issue. I work at a hotel, and I have an issue. And I just wanted to get your information so we could contact you. We have a civil rights issue at our hotel, and it was a gentleman that was asking me if it was somebody I could direct him to. And it was ironic. He just asked me the other day, and I just so happened to be driving and listening to this program, and I didn't realize that you had been put into that position. I was wondering if you could give your information out online or how we can contact you.
Absolutely, I'll give it right now. But I also want to take this opportunity to say that our office has investigators that investigate discrimination as it pertains to employment, housing, public accommodations, education, and the like. So if it is an employment discrimination issue, yes, absolutely contact us. But in addition to that, we also investigate whether people are being paid fair wages and whether or not there's discrimination in the course of hiring in terms of the ban the box law. We also enforce that. So that being said, please do call us, and if we can help you, we will. I've also instructed our staff, we have a very open staff, that even if something doesn't fall into a category and someone comes to us, we don't leave them alone until we've figured out where to send them or what to do to give them help, including, even though it's not under our responsibilities, we even will conduct expungements for people, just because it's something I have a passion about. So that being said, our number is 410-396-3141. You can email us at civilrights@baltimorecity.gov, and we're located at 7 East Redwood Street, 9th floor, of course, Baltimore City 21202.
Okay, we also have Hank. Welcome to Today with Dr. Kaye, Hank.
Hello, Dr. Kaye. I'd like to say this is a great show for your first show.
Thank you.
I will be listening to you, as I have listened to you sit in and as I've listened to you commentate on other shows.
Thank you.
Now, Delegate Jones, right?
No, Jill.
I'm Delegate Carter.
Yes.
I followed you a little bit because you're on the radio, so you're on Morgan Radio, so I hear you quite. I've heard you a couple times. My question is this, right? Although your job is to fight discrimination, right, what is your plan to prelude or help young black men and women, mainly black men, get themselves together and build a system where they can help themselves find jobs as opposed to going someplace where they'll be discriminated at against getting a job?
So, thank you for the question. And I wish I could do everything and be all things to all people. But we can, like I was just saying, even if we can't help in our office, we have a mission that we will find the people that can. And so just so you know, in addition to our office, there's other opportunities out there that the City of Baltimore has, like the Mayor's Office of Employment Development and other agencies that possibly can help with employment and the like. we do make sure that people are not discriminated at the door. As I said, with the ban the box law, we enforce that. So if we find that employers are actually asking or inquiring about criminal records before a person has been given a conditional offer of employment, we can actually require that employer cease and desist that. And if there's a violation, we can actually recover damages for the individual that's been discriminated against, and other forms of employment discrimination. I'm certainly willing and I'm hoping that not only with me and our staff, our very limited staff, by the way, our commissioners, such as Dr. Whitehead and others, can help kind of partner with different stakeholders, individuals, and organizations in the community to help us be able to do even more than what our charge is.
Valerie from Baltimore, welcome to Today with Dr. Kaye.
Hi, how are you?
Hello.
Good. I have a question. Under discrimination, do you work with like lead housing? Because in the city we have so many lead homes. I don't know if that's a form of discrimination or not, but we have so many homes that's full of lead, and that to me is an easy fix. We have so many kids going into the educational program with behavior problems, low academics, all because there's lead in the home. And then I feel it's unfair for the landlords to have to deal with it when the paint companies put it in the homes. But I know that's...
No, thank you for the question. You know what? You sing in my language. You sing in my song. Basically, when I was in the legislature, one of my primary issues that caused me great frustration was the lack of the legislative will to deal with the lead issue. And the market share liability bill, which is what we call the bill that goes after the paint companies, was one of my bills. I wasn't the only sponsor of the bill, but I was a consistent sponsor when I was there. But of course, the legislative body was never willing to pass that bill. And in fact, the landlords don't even support the bill either. Basically, there is no advocates out there for people that are victims of lead poisoning. That being said, the answer is yes. It is not something our office has dealt with. But we were just having, at one of our recent meeting of our Community Relations Commission, the discussion about our authority to address housing discrimination. And so we did discuss our desire to be able to come after this issue of lead poisoning as a disparate impact issue that is a product of discrimination, and do something to force change with it. And so it's a passion of mine. In fact, it's one of the most painful issues that I addressed as a legislator, and it still continues to be painful, because if these children were not poor and black, it would never be allowed that they are getting permanently brain damaged, unable to fulfill their whole potential in life, and destroyed, 30 days out of the hospital, many of them. And it's been allowed to happen in Baltimore for decades. The legislature could have fixed it, chose not to. And so that's what I was kind of getting to earlier about how it's so important that we focus on our local legislative body, local and state, and what they can do and what they have the ability to do, but choose not to do.
I mean, I was looking at one of your quotes. One of the things that you said, you once said that Baltimore, when it comes to issues of racial and economic justice, has not advanced very far since the time of my father. So what do you think, if you were to kind of name, three things that people could do? Because I want people, when they're listening.
What people could do.
What people could do. Well, no, if we're talking about Today with Dr. Kaye, we want to be able to give people practical advice, right? So they listen to this long show, but they walk away saying, okay, what can I do with this? Can you just give us kind of three things that people could do right now if they wanted to transform Baltimore City? What could they walk out and do?
So that's a loaded question, because the first thing I'm going to say is something I've been saying for a long time, and it has yet to really happen, but I'm going to keep saying it because I fully believe it. Now, I understand there's a lot of people out there that have given up on the political system because they feel it doesn't serve them. But I still think it's one of our only tools to bring about change. It's our only vehicle. And so you must be a registered voter. And if you live in Baltimore City and you have not yet formed a successful third party that you believe has a viable chance of success, then frankly, you really have only one political party option. And you need to really address that and face that as a reality. And so I know my friends that are not in the main party are mad at me right now, but the bottom line is that if you want to bring about change, I think that you have to play. You have to be a participant in the game of change. and that's the political system. And so you have to force change by the people that you elect. We are beginning to see some changes in terms of newer, younger people that are getting elected at the city and state levels. It's a beginning, but it's far from an end, and it's not enough. It's not just enough to elect someone because you think that they are young or bring new energy. They actually have to have an agenda. And if your issue, as mine is discrimination and eradicating discrimination, the vestiges of discrimination, then you have to have people that are committed and have a passion to doing that. That has to be a part of their platform. They can't run away from issues of racial justice and segregation. And so you have to demand that of the elected people, but you have to participate. If you don't participate in the process, then you really can't demand anything of the elected officials. That's one. Participate. Okay. Number two, your city council, and we're seeing more of it. We're seeing a lot more of this participation since the time I was elected at the city and state level, but you've got to go down to City Hall, and you've got to go to Annapolis, which is much more difficult. You have to make demands of the Baltimore City delegation, and so don't just register and vote, but actually be involved in legislation and policy changes. And then I'm just going to say the other thing, which is new, is work with my office and my commission. We have the Community Relations Commission, and I know it's been pretty passive over the last few decades, but that's my goal, is to change it, to transform this, to make this Community Relations Commission to be a real vehicle for bringing about radical, revolutionary change. It is time. See, I know I've heard some people that talk about civil rights and say, we never stop fighting, we never stop working, it's never going to be fixed. I actually don't believe that. I believe some of these really serious things can actually be fixed on a local level if we push them hard enough.
So you need to get registered. If you are not registered, you need to get registered and participate. I mean, we say it over and over again because we know if you don't register to vote, the time's going to come for voting and it will pass you by.
And then, let me also say, not just you, because there's a lot of people that are listening to the show and that are involved and they do vote. But you've got to go and grab up some other people. And it happens to me all the time that I come across people, especially, some young people, they're like, why should I vote? It's a waste of my time, blah, 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 blah. And I argue until I'm blue in the face. But at the same time, I do what? I give them that registration form. I have them fill it out, and I say, you know what? I'm going to walk you through the process because I know you don't believe me and you don't want to do it. But sometimes you got to kind of coerce people to do it. And here's why. So I've told this to people many years. If you call your delegate and you call and you say that you are being mistreated by your landlord or that you have a nuisance neighbor that you want them to address, the first thing they're going to do is look on their Outlook system to see if you're a registered voter in their district.
Oh, so that's a part of even taking your complaint, right?
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
If you aren't in the game, then you're really just you're knocking yourself out of being your issues being addressed. You've got to be in the game, and that's being a registered voter. We have this thing called district courtesy or legislative courtesy, where if you call me, but you're in another legislative district, I send it over to that legislator. There's a real interest in helping and fixing problems for people that have elected you and gotten you into office.
So, got to participate. The second thing, you need to go down to City Hall. And Annapolis is a little bit farther, like you just can't walk there, but you can go to City Hall and you can make demands. They have regular meetings for the community. I would say, and not to contradict you, maybe to add to what you're saying, I'm saying go to the meetings in your community. The communities have meetings. Do you know who your council person is? I've asked people, Director Carter, do you even know what district you live in? Because there's some people who are like, I don't know my district. I'm like, if you don't know your district, then you don't know who your council person is.
If you're saying that your senators are Van Hollen and Cardin, that means you don't know who your local representatives are because they're the senators for the state. Okay, they're all of our senators. Yeah. But your local senator, meaning your legislative district senator, there's a handful of them in Baltimore City.
And it's the ones who speak for you. I mean, I'm in the 3rd district. I'm under Ryan Dorsey. So I know if I have a problem, if I want the light fixed on my block, or if we want a stop sign, which we just got, so I'm thanking Ryan Dorsey for that. We wanted a stop sign at the corner where the school was. It was Ryan Dorsey we went to and not Van Hollen. So now I'd like you to stay with us because after the break, we're going to come back and we're going to wrap our conversation with Director Jill P. Carter. We're asking her questions about Baltimore City. We want to hear what her vision is for the city if she were to imagine a new world. It's Today with Dr. Kaye. I'm Dr. Kaye. Stay with us. Welcome back. This is Dr. Kaye on Today with Dr. Kaye. We're here speaking with director and former delegate Jill P. Carter. We have talked about her legacy. She is our first trendsetter that we are profiling here on Today with Dr. Kaye. Director Carter, I have to ask you, because Baltimore City has had over 250 homicides this year, that we are on a record to set another record. In fact, in the last 30 days, I believe we've had 35 people killed. I say this all the time, and I ask this all the time, but have we reached a crisis point? And if so, I mean, because maybe, so some people don't think it's a crisis point. This is just the normal state of things happening. But have we reached a crisis point? And if so, what do we do about it?
So we've reached a crisis point many years ago. The numbers may be higher now, but what we're seeing is the results of the crises that we've left unaddressed for many, many years. One of the issues, which is everything isn't not in everybody's purview. One of the issues that's in my purview, and it's not the be-all, end-all, but we know that part of what we're seeing is the result of the breakdown between the police department and the communities. And so it's virtually impossible after many, many years, decades even, of disconnect between law enforcement and communities to suddenly have law enforcement be able to address the issues in communities when they still are very, very disconnected from the people. They still very rarely, in very rare communities, rare is it that they can know what's going on, that they can have people that they're talking to that can give them the heads up as to what's brewing, that they can know that because you've had one homicide today, you're looking at 3 more tomorrow because of the issues of retaliation. If you don't know the people, you can't address the problem. So we can only work to try to change that and fix that now. And I hope that that's what we're doing with the consent decree, which the mayor has been very active on, getting that consent decree signed, getting the monitor in place, appointing a civilian oversight task force. What I'm hoping to do with my agency is really move it from what's called a civilian review board to an overall oversight agency where we have authority and ability to have complete oversight of law enforcement and in every area, and not just these areas of alleged misconduct. And I think that, over time it'll get better, which is not helping us now. So I think that things such as the proactive role that people are taking, such as the young ladies that started the ceasefire, I think we need that ceasefire, but we needed more. We need more participation, and we need it more frequently. We need every day to be a ceasefire. We need people out in the streets every day, going into communities, not being afraid, and engaging people. People, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but, people that aren't really involved in some of these communities that are the least served and the most neglected for years will be very surprised at the beautiful people and the great conversations that you can have if you just go talk to people and really take them where they are and address their needs. And so one of the things that came out of the ceasefire, again, we need it all the time. And along with, I think, so we also have a lot of fragmentation. So you have the ceasefire, but then you have like the mayor's call to action where she's coming and bringing all these resources to the community. I think that they should combine their efforts,
right,
and work more together. And I think that through that kind of collaboration, we'll begin to see some change. It's heartbreaking now. And when I woke up this morning and saw what happened in Vegas, I felt very, very sad about it. But I could not feel solely sad about Vegas without thinking about all the deaths that happen right here every day in my city. I think there were 4, maybe more than that last night, 4 shootings at least I woke up to in my area, actually. So it's it's painful. But I have to have hope. I think I'm an eternal optimist, actually, which is bad. I actually do believe it's going to get better. And guess what? You've said it before, Dr. Kaye, and I say it all the time. No, some miraculous person or new leader isn't going to swoop down into Baltimore and fix it all. No, we are the ones that we've been waiting for. Mm-hmm. We've got to be the ones to do it. And, I don't like to address this issue, but I'm like really kind of an elder now. So I'm not looking for some elder to give me advice on what to do. It's time for me to take all of the knowledge and all the experience that I've acquired and amassed over these years and work with others, young people as well, and people of my peers, and we need to work together and take it to the streets. And I'm not just talking, like I was out in the ceasefire. I participate with the mayor's call to action. I mean, I think that we all just have to do our part And the more that we do it, the more we'll build, and I think we'll begin to see some change.
Well, we want to open it back up to our callers who want to talk to you, because what they have here at WEAA, they have Director Carter. She has a direct line into ways that we can fix the city. She is someone who can get problems solved. And so if you have an issue, give us a call at 410-319-8888. Troy from Baltimore City, welcome to Today with Dr. Kaye.
So if you have an issue, give us a call.
Troy, can you please turn down your radio?
Troy from Baltimore City, welcome to Today with Dr.
Hello?
Hello, Troy. If you can turn on your radio, we would appreciate it. How are you
Can you hear
doing?
me?
We can hear you. We can hear you, sir. What's your question?
Man, it's a pleasure. How you doing, Dr. Kaye?
How are you?
I've been following Mrs. Carter for a while. I love hearing her talk on different shows and everything. What I want to say is, I remember when they first started city council and she came to the restaurant that I work in downtown, because we sell salads. And it was basically like a superstar walked into our restaurant. The people knew who she was. They were like, oh, that's her. There she goes, that's her. We were very excited just to see her. And what I like about her is I heard her talk one time before, talk about what she had. She really couldn't use our napkins because of the way that the people out napkins was, that she couldn't really use what she had as far as her quality and what she brings to the table. But I'm actually glad she is now back in Baltimore City, and I really believe, based on who she is and what she brings to the table, I'm not trying to say nothing bad about no certain person, but I think her appointment is more important to the city of Baltimore than the mayor is. Because I really believe everybody knows that Jill's in town. And then the Jill said is certain things that we cannot do, and I expect a lot from her. I live in Baltimore County, but I expect a great thing from that young lady. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. We are happy that instead of going to Annapolis every day, that Director Jill P. Carter is in so many ways back in Baltimore. We know technically you never left, but I understand what the caller is saying. You're back here doing the work that your father began so many years ago, and this is kind of the work you're pushing forward. We have Kenneth on the line. Kenneth, welcome to Today with Dr. Kaye.
Hello, how are you doing?
Hello.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine, sir. What's your question or comment?
I want to know if I don't think she gave the information, that her direct number, her direct line. I'm dealing with displacement in our building at the Chase House where I live, and the contractors. This used to be a public housing dwelling, and we used to pay less according to our income. But now that they are renovating the insides of the apartments, we're not sure that it's going to stay that way. And they've moved some of us inside of the building 3 or 4 times. And is that displacement, or is that against the law, or can they do that?
Okay.
And
Okay,
Kenneth,
we'll
thank
answer
you.
your question.
I'm going to encourage you. So the number is 410-396-3141, or just email civilrights@baltimorecity.gov. Contact us, and we will get more information and figure out how you can be helped. If we can help you, we will.
And that's what Director Carter is known for getting the job done. We have Leo from Bolton Hill. Welcome to Today with Dr. Kaye, Leo.
Yes, good afternoon, Dr. Kaye.
Good afternoon.
And Elder Director Jill Carter. This is Leo Burroughs Jr.
Hello.
Elder Leo Burroughs Jr. How you doing?
I'm fine. The show would not be complete if you hadn't called, Leo. Thank you for calling.
Well, I worked with her father, who was a great leader, and I don't know, chips off the old block or block off the old chips.
Nice.
But I must tell you, Walter was magnificent, and so is his daughter. And we cannot and will not find anyone who was more qualified to do what Jill is doing than she. So we're happy that you're on board, Jill. Just one quick question. Are you able and willing to conduct community workshops that focus on civil rights and wage enforcement, kind of whether it be role play or what have you? Do you have the kind of staff to do that on a limited basis or otherwise?
So we have really limited
Thank you,
staff,
Leo.
but we can do it. Thank you, Dr. Burroughs. I appreciate your call, and I appreciate your giving me the encouragement. Yes, use that number I gave, 410-396-3141, or email, and honestly, we will schedule it. We want to get out in the community more, and we do it. We do it now whenever there's an opportunity that presents itself. But if you give us a request, we'll find a way to do it. We would love to.
And I think that's important. I want to add because, as I stated, when we started with Director Carter, with being totally transparent, I am one of her commissioners for the Community Relations Commission. And my whole reason for saying yes when Director Carter asked me was because I wanted to have my hands in the soil of Baltimore City. Why am I doing Today with Dr. Kaye? I want to have my hands in the soil of Baltimore City. If we want to change the city, we have to be the ones we've been waiting for. And we want to use Today with Dr. Kaye as a vehicle. We want to use the Community Relations Commission as a vehicle for making the type of change that we need to have here. We have Reverend Napato on the line from Baltimore City. Good day, Reverend. Welcome to the show.
Hey, sister, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
The healing that you do, as Delegate Carter and her father did before.
Doc Kaye, I missed you Monday.
And I was on my way until an emergency happened. I live at Penn North, and the ambulance come up here every 10 minutes. The fentanyl made in China is killing our people, and we have to do something to address it. And I felt that was more important than I apologize. And I honor you for celebrating Harold Carter, Reverend Harold Llewellyn Carter. Harold Llewellyn Dobson, who started Associated Black Charities, but nobody wants to give him credit for that. Mm-hmm. So I apologize. I just wanted to say this, and it's so good to hear you on the air, sister. One of the things that is very unfortunate in this city, and it's the best of times and the worst of times. If you go to certain parts of the city, as you know, there are benefit districts in Bolton Hill. That means private police, and they have additional help from the police, the normal police. The same thing is true in other areas. And unfortunately, other areas like Zone 21217, Freddie Gray, where I live, I live at Penn North Plaza, right on the corner of the Mega Center or what have you. I'm saying that to say what? It is very unfortunate in the Western District, which you know well, that there are seven police assigned to this section. That is criminal. That's criminal. I was with the mayor on Saturday. She had the thing at Lillian Jones Rec Center. And then she came up to where we were doing hugs, not guns. Mm-hmm. Right? And it's very unfortunate to have that type of scenario. And so my question is, at what point do the police who feel they have disengaged because of Freddie Gray, they showed a vote of non-competence in the past, police commissioner, black man Bates, do we get any kind of crime maintained, solved, or like? Last thing is, you knew Judge Kenneth Johnson, the civil rights attorney from Alabama, a member of our Church Union Baptist, who impounded a grand jury because he was approached by Vanguard, the black policeman, and I was in the room with Reverend Dobson, where they say they were sick and tired of arresting these white boys from the county and they were being let go. So he impounded a grand jury. There's a report, as you know well.
And Reverend, I'm going to have to cut in here. I am so sorry. I'm glad that you called. We're running out of time, and we do want to get to a few more callers. And what I'll do, Director Carter, just to pull everything together, I'm going to go to Ed from Baltimore, get his question as well, and then have you answer both of them kind of in your closing statement. Ed, welcome to the show.
Yes, I would like to know what is your guest name on the show?
This is Director Jill P. Carter. She's the director here of the Civil Rights Commission here in Baltimore City.
All right. Mrs. Carter, I have something to say, and I have been saying this to many leaders over the years in America, and it seems like nobody is getting it. What we are facing here in America, that is not a physical war, that is a spiritual war, because the majority of Americans do not know their nationality. They call us African Americans. We are not African Americans. What everybody need to hear today, you are Hebrew Israelites. You are descendants of the tribe of Judah, and this war is going on against us since the 4th century. This is a war for...
Well, I definitely agree with Ed. We're in times where it feels like we are constantly at war. Whether or not we call ourselves Hebrew Israelites, we call ourselves African Americans, we call ourselves, Afro-Hebrews, whatever the terminology that you use, we know that people of color are under attack, and we feel like we're under attack here in Baltimore City. So, Director Carter, kind of if you can just kind of pull all this together, and if you can just tell people that when you think about your legacy and how you want to be remembered, if we go 50 years out, and I'm setting up with my son the Jill P. Carter Foundation, right? So what do you want people to remember about you? What do you want them to say?
Wow. Well, 50 years from now, I'd like people to say that Baltimore is a just city. I'd like it to be a just city. I'd like it to be a city where it still has a diverse population. We right now still have about 62% of the population is still black. It's still a majority black city. I'd like to see black people be able to remain in the city and do well. I'd like to be a part of the movement toward making sure that an equity lens is used in how we plan and develop for the rest of time throughout Baltimore City so that people are not left out. I would like for people to say that I worked very hard to bring justice and eradicate discrimination so that everybody from the time of birth until their death could say that they had fair opportunities in this life. But really quick, I got to say, Troy, thanks for the big up, and Dr. Kaye, call me. We have a lot of work to do, and I'm just getting started. We're just getting started. And let me just briefly say, so this agency's been around for a minute, but it needed a little bit new energy, and that's what, not just with me I'm bringing, but with the commissioners and the board members, and frankly the mayor who had the vision to appoint me. I really do feel that this is my niche. I'm very excited about the work. I'm so excited because rather than pushing up against people that are resisting to make laws that can bring fairness and justice, we actually have laws on the books that give us authority to do things right now to bring justice and equity to people.
Well, thank you so much. Director Jill P. Carter is the current Director of Civil Rights and Wage Enforcement. She's continuing the work that her father did. She is our first Today with Dr. Kaye trendsetter. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, and happy anniversary, Dr. Kaye.
Thank you. Today is not only my inaugural
It's your anniversary.
It's my anniversary. 19 years of marriage. So I am going to say happy anniversary on the air to my soulmate and to the love of my life, Johnny Whitehead, because I am now sharing my anniversary with the anniversary of this show, which hopefully for many years to come we will be celebrating. Today with Dr. Kaye is a production of WEAA. The show is produced by host Dr. Carsonia Wise Whitehead and producer Iore Odigizua. Our board operators are Andre Melton and Isaiah George. Our interns are Tamar Giles, Anissa Morales, and Petra Dormand. I want you to stay tuned for Faraji Muhammad with For the Culture next. We have a full lineup here at WEAA, which stands for We Educate African Americans. Start listening early in the morning. You can start as early as 6 a.m. with Mornings with Mikkel. You can roll right into 1A that comes on at 10 a.m. You can go at 12 p.m. and listen to the Master Class with Robert Shaid. He talked to Patti LaBelle today. I was blown away. You can go in from there listening to Sandy Mallory, who's on for 2 hours, and then you can join me back here tomorrow at 3 p.m. for Today with Dr. Kaye, when we'll talk about trending topics and then just keep the night going after that. I believe you have to act as if it was possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it every day. Next, coming up is Faraji Muhammad right here on Public Radio, WEAA 88.9 FM, the voice of the community. Thank you, Baltimore. This is Dr. Kaye. Thanks for listening.